All right, let's jump right in. Today we're talking about bubbles. And no, not the fun kind you blow in your backyard. We're talking about the kind that can make people incredibly rich, and then, just as fast, completely ruin them. But here's the twist. Understanding them might just be the key to making the good times last in every part of your life.
To really get this, we've got to travel back in time. I mean, way back, to the 1600s in Holland, which was home to one of the most wild financial crazies in all of human history. And it's a story that starts with a flower.
I mean, just try to picture that for a second. 46 oxen. We're not talking about a fancy car. We're talking about a whole herd of livestock, enough to run a farm, all for a single flower bulb that hadn't even bloomed yet. This wasn't just a trend, people. This was a full-blown mania.
And it all happens so fast. The tulip goes from this exotic little flower to the absolute center of the Dutch economy. People were literally quitting their jobs to trade tulips. But then, almost overnight in 1637, boom, the music stopped. The market completely evaporated. No one was buying at any price. The bubble had burst, and it left behind total financial ruin and a long, painful recession.
So right now you're probably thinking, wow, what a bizarre story about some Dutch people and their flowers. But here's the thing, and this is so important. This pattern, this whole cycle of boom and bust, it wasn't a one-off. It has happened again and again and again all throughout history.
And that's really the heart of it. Bubbles aren't a Dutch thing. They're a human thing. It doesn't matter if it's tulips in the 1600s, the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, or the housing market crash in 2008. This pattern of, irrational excitement followed by a really painful collapse seems to be hardwired right into us.
So let's actually put a name to this. Economists call it the economic cycle, and it's this predictable, if kind of brutal rhythm. First, you've got the boom. That's when prices just skyrocket, based more on hype and belief than any real value. And then, you get the bust. That sudden, sharp, and often painful slap back to reality.
When you're actually living through one of these cycles, it feels like a total roller coaster. If you look at a short-term view of the market, like this chart of the S&P 500, you can see just how insane those peaks and valleys are. The boom feels incredible, like you can't possibly lose, but the bust, it's terrifying. It seriously looks and feels like the entire world is falling apart.
But then, something pretty amazing happens when you zoom out. When you look at the bigger picture, the long game, what happens to those catastrophic world-ending crashes? Well, they start to look like tiny little blips, just bumps in the road on a long, steady climb upward. That long-term perspective, it changes everything.
Okay, so we've seen this pattern in history, we've seen it in the stock market, but here's where we make the big turn. The real insight here is that this cycle doesn't just happen on Wall Street. It happens on your street. It happens inside your house. And yeah, it even happens in your relationships.
We've just talked all about how these bubbles work in big, complex economies. But what if I told you that the exact same forces, the same psychology, is at play in our personal lives, especially with the people we're closest to? Let me introduce you to the marriage bubble. This is that honeymoon phase, or maybe it's years later, when everything just feels perfect. You feel like you've won the relationship lottery. You look at other couples struggling, and you kind of feel sorry for them. And in that blissful state, you start to believe you're invincible. It leads you to ignore red flags and take on huge new stressors, a new house, a new baby, just assuming everything will be fine because, hey, you're you.
So why on earth do we fall for these personal bubbles? Well, it turns out it's not random at all. They're actually fueled by these powerful, totally predictable quirks in how our brains work. Let's break down the 3 big psychological biases that inflate these bubbles.
First up, we've got confirmation bias. Okay, so think of your brain as a really loyal sports fan. It only pays attention to the evidence that proves your team is the best, and it completely tunes out anything that suggests otherwise. Basically, we see exactly what we want to see. So take this quote from a case study. When this woman, Kim, and her husband were deep in their bubble, they'd go to parties and look at every other couple there and only see proof of how much more perfect their relationship was. They weren't seeing reality. They were just seeing the story they really wanted to believe about themselves.
All right, next up is herd behavior. This is that really deep, primal instinct we all have to just follow the crowd. It's why things go viral, sure, but it's also why financial panics happen. We just automatically assume that the herd knows something we don't, even when that herd is running straight for a cliff.
Just think about Layla's story. She absolutely loved her career, but after she had her baby, she was suddenly surrounded by this herd of voices. her mom, her friends, scary parenting blogs, all pushing this idea that she should stay home. And that pressure became so intense that she made a massive life decision, not based on what she actually wanted, but based on what the herd told her she was supposed to want. And that brings us to the third bubble maker, overconfidence. This is our funny little tendency to believe that we are smarter, better, and way less likely to fail than the average person. We think somehow that the laws of statistics and probability just don't apply to us.
And if you want proof, get this. A survey asked a bunch of newly engaged couples a question. Now, they all knew the statistic that about half of marriages end in divorce. But when asked to estimate their own chance of getting divorced, the answer was 0%. Not 1%, not it's unlikely, 0. That, right there, is the textbook definition of overconfidence. The powerful belief that it just won't happen to me.
So, if these bubbles are just part of being human, and if they always inevitably burst, are we all just doomed? Should we just sit around and brace for impact? No, not at all. The real key is learning how to manage the cycle and maybe even use the bust to build something way, way stronger.
And this is where a really cool economic idea called creative destruction comes into play. Yeah, it sounds a little harsh, but the basic idea is that sometimes things have to be torn down so they can be rebuilt better. For a relationship, this means that the bursting of that "we're the perfect couple" bubble is actually a massive opportunity. It's a chance to stop pretending and to finally build a relationship that's real, honest, and truly resilient.
So how do you actually see a bust coming before it's too late? Well, you can start by taking your relationship's temperature. Just like economists use indicators to check on the economy's health, you can use a few super simple questions to check in on your own domestic economy. Just be honest. How satisfied are you? Are you really spending quality time together? And how are your arguments? Answering these honestly and regularly can give you a heads up that your bubble might be getting a little thin.
When it comes right down to it, we all live inside bubbles of some kind. In our jobs, with our money, and in our relationships. The goal isn't to live a bubble-free life. I don't think that's even possible. The real challenge, the real skill, is to develop the awareness to see the bubble you're in, to understand how fragile it is, and to be ready, not just for the pop, but for what you're going to build right after. So I'll just leave you with this. Are you aware of yours?